We need to move on to the big story of the day, which is gripping half the world, which is the disappearance of a deep-sea submarine carrying wealthy adventure tourists off the coast of Newfoundland, where they were on a 5-day trip to view the wreck of the Titanic. Now, we're reporting here, Jason, that aside from the pilot and the CEO of the company, who I suppose technically are the steerage passengers, the other 3 passengers are all British, and one of them's just a teenager, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, so last night they had 40 hours left of oxygen. How much have I got left now, Susie? My maths is pretty awful, but
it's about a day, less than a
day. So I mean, you don't even want to try and imagine the terror, if they're still alive, they are going through in a very small space, uncertain if they'll get rescued. We're not sure what went wrong. It's kind of, that sense of of claustrophobia they must be feeling and panic is absolutely terrifying. I am kind of, there was a great story in the Mirror on the next 2 pages after the main report of this guy who was trapped in a submarine off the coast of Ireland in the 1970s and survived. And he kind of says, don't give up hope. They had something like just 14 minutes there left by the time they surfaced. No, you can. I mean, sorry, 1973. I mean, it was just, that gives you a little bit of of optimism that, it's not over till it's over. But you do worry about the safety of this craft, Titan, the fact that it's kind of controlled by a games console set.
Yeah, and they've got some building pipes that operate as ballast tanks, and it's an experimental craft, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really like the Titanic itself, I think, because the CEO's on there, which, of course, Bruce Ismay was on the Titanic when it sank, although he made his escape. So I've just had to watch the film with my daughter, so I'm full of Titanic stuff. And only the elite could really afford to do it. So you, by definition, it attracts the great and good. The Titanic went down, they had Rothschilds on there, there was John Jacob Astor, there was W.T. Stead, who was the greatest journalist of his generation, former editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. And now we've got a billionaire, we've got a multi-millionaire, perhaps people some of us had never heard of before, but their dads, their husbands, their family men, with relatives all waiting for news, just as relatives did in 1912 when the Titanic hit the iceberg in exactly the same spot. I mean, it doesn't really bear thinking about how cold they must be as well down there. There's no sunlight, there's no nothing. They must be perishing and trying to conserve what little oxygen they've got. Now, what do you think, everybody? I'm sure there are people out there who are poring over every second and every update of this and have opinions about how likely it is they're going to be found. It does seem, we're hearing this morning, that there are reports and sounds have been heard on the ocean floor. Rhythmic banging, presumably the SOS Morse code. A Canadian search and rescue plane has picked them up every half an hour. So one assumes it's someone inside the craft banging on the sides to help people locate them. Sound travels a long, long way underwater, so that is the best way to be found. And if they're doing it every half hour, Jason, that implies that they're trying to conserve their energy. They're maybe they'll have a bit longer than expected because they're staying calm. They're not going mad.
The other way of looking at it is it's actually quite worrying that it hasn't risen to the surface. The ballast tank should have emptied so it could gently rise up. If it's on the bed of the ocean floor, that's much more frightening, primarily because this is about the only submarine in the world which can go that deep. Most of the rescue submarines, will only go to kind of 6,600 meters. This is almost 3,000 to 4,000 meters. That is the real worry, because then it makes the whole rescue operation much harder.
Yeah, and the bottom of the ocean floor there is really craggy as well, apparently, so they could be wedged between things. If they haven't been able to open the ballast tanks, it implies they're either stuck, something is holding them down, or they have lost power some way. They're not able to actually operate the tanks.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit to me, Susie, as well, which does feel, and I get the drama of the story, and I totally understand the fears and how difficult this must be for the families involved. There was a little bit of me like this was this massive multinational rescue operation taking place for 6 very privileged tourists. And we kind of almost do nothing when kind of a boat goes down in the Mediterranean or the Channel with you know, dozens of asylum seekers and refugees escaping a much harder life. And I just sometimes feel the contrast needs to be made.
Yes, I think so. I wonder what we would be doing if this was if refugees were coming across the Mediterranean in a submarine and it got lost.
Yeah,
I suspect not quite as much money in it, but hopes for the best and for the salvation of Stockton Rush, who is the pilot, Hamish Harding, one of the British businessmen who's on there, Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, who's only 19, and Paul Henry Nargelet, who's in his 70s but is the pilot. Sharon says she's praying for their safe return, as are we all, and as apparently is the king, because he knows the Daewoods. They are on the board of the Prince's Trust. So there are a lot of the great and good and a lot of the millionaires worrying about this, like Jason says, less so about refugees in the Mediterranean, but I do hope they get found, and that the sounds of banging does indicate that there is hope still to be had.